2 suitcases, life in the backpack, new destination, full tank and a roadmap. My DJ, my best friend by my side, windows rolled down as I put the car in drive.
I don't know where we'll go, just know that we've got miles. We've got miles and miles to go.
Hi, I'm Dee Perry, and I'm joined by Aaron Spears. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, Dee.
And Aaron and I are co-hosting CIFF Speaks, the official podcast of the Cleveland International Film Festival. And we're really happy to welcome a guest today who is the producer, cinematographer, editor, and director of the film The ARCHIVETTES, Megan Rossman. Megan, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you have Ohio roots, so I'm thinking you would have been in town to introduce your film if the festival had taken place as planned. So we want to give you that opportunity now. What would you say to the film festival audience about the ARCHIVETTES?
Well, when I introduce the film, I always tell people the film is very much encouraging you to think about your own history and how you want to be remembered. And I think it's very easy for us to go through our lives without having any consideration for that until we're kind of planning at the end of our lives. So I would encourage people to think about keeping a diary or printing their photographs or just kind of handling some of that stuff and thinking about their legacy while they're in a position to be able to do that.
And having said that, you open the film by following Melissa Sachs on her way to donate some of her deceased partner's memorabilia, things that she's collected. And Melissa wants to take them to what she thinks of as the perfect place, the Lesbian Herstory Archives in Brooklyn. Why did you decide to have the audience enter the LHA that way?
I feel like the archives is such a unique place, and I spent a lot of time thinking about how to get people there. And for me, the idea of making a donation was the most practical way to get someone there, right? Because you don't really need this thing until you need it. And so losing someone, trying to figure out what to do with their materials, how they want to be remembered, I feel like that's something everyone can relate to. And so I wanted to use that to segue in to explain what the archives is and sort of the purpose it serves.
And how did you get connected to it? Were you looking to donate something? Were you looking for reference material?
I actually used to live a couple blocks away from the archives. So I had a friend who came to visit me and they got off the subway and they were navigating via Google Maps and they said, "Hey, Megan, what is the Lesbian Herstory Archives?" And I had no idea what it was, but I was like, you know what? I'm a lesbian. I should know what this is. And so I reached out to them. And I just remember the first time I walked in there, it was like a coming home experience. It was kind of the first time I've always thought about, family history and kind of like tracing back in your bloodline, but I hadn't thought about the community history. And so it was just this amazing, empowering experience to realize all these women had come before me that were like me and that had gone on to live like incredible and fulfilling lives.
So, Megan, the ARCHIVETTES were created in 1974 by Deborah Edel and Joan Nessel. What did you find out about their purpose for creating them?
So this actually from them came from kind of a practical perspective because Joan Nessel was a full-time professor and Deb Adel was also, she worked as a school psychologist for many years. And when they were doing research about gay women's history, they either couldn't find anything or they found that it was kind of hidden. It was like maybe it was in the library, but it was in a basement in a box, like in a corner, wasn't very well protected. And so when they realized that, a group of came together out of the Gay Academic Union and they decided, you know what? Like we need to keep track of our own history because if we don't, then no one's going to keep track of it.
So what exactly is an archivette and how do they function at LHA?
That's a good question. No one knows exactly when or where this name came from, but it's essentially something that the coordinated committee started calling themselves. So the women that, I should say, the people that run LHA, because there are some non-binary folks involved in it, and there's potentially room for trans folks to be involved. But when it started, it was just on Joan and Deb, and they realized at some point, hey, if something happens to us and we like die, then there's going to be no one to take care of the archives. So they formed this coordinating committee. And at that point, it was coming out of the like feminist movement. They really believed in equality. So they decided everyone has equal say. And this coordinating committee is basically the group that keeps the archives running, does tours, does the work, and there are other people that help it. But at some point, the members of the coordinating committee started calling themselves the Archivettes.
I like it. It kind of sounds like a cheerleaders group, which is not far from true.
That's
The,
true. Yeah, I like that.
the archives themselves are crammed with books and other sorts of material. And in the film, there was mention of not using a patriarchal system for organizing the shelves. So, how does one navigate finding specific items?
It really depends on the collection. So everything, again, is coming out of this like feminist movement, and they've kept with that same ethos. So if you're looking for a book, books are done by subjects. So if you're looking for something that's like in the arts realm, you'd go to the arts section and then you'd look by the author's first name. Now, for other materials, some things are done by names, the photo collection, for example, but the t-shirt collection is not in order by name. It's in order by just the alphabet. Like, what does a t-shirt start with? Like, what it might be the subject or what's listed. And then there's also ephemera. And I would say that's probably the thing that's maybe the most challenging to track down if you're looking for a hat. Or one of my favorite things in the archives is a baseball card collection that someone took the time to actually make baseball cards for these softball players in a lesbian softball league. So the things like that, I think, are more based on institutional knowledge. And they do have a very deeply cataloged system, but it really depends what kind of thing that you're looking for.
I got to say, Megan, as a current librarian, it was great to see a focus not just on like books as the way to transfer knowledge, but like you said, just the ephemera and even like the homemade stuff that really does a great job of cataloging and chronicling for future generations to look at. But then also like the other part of my brain was just like, how do you organize all this?
It's a huge, it's a big problem. I think for them, they never would have imagined when it started in Joan Nessel's apartment that it would grow into what it is now, right? So a lot of the cataloging came from this idea of we want to keep this grassroots, we want to keep this really accessible, and we want to kind of rethink these systems in a way that's more supportive of our community.
Yeah, because it's great to have the materials, but you also have to have a way for people to know you have it, find it, know where it's at, and get access to it as well.
And I was wondering, on the note of access, how much there is to the archives. I mean, does it function like a lending library or more of a reference space where you have to use the materials on site?
So it functions as a reference space. It's interesting because they will make the space open to you if you're in a really difficult situation. Like they've had researchers traveling from Europe that are only in town for a few days. And they will do things like, make sure that person has access to a key so that they can spend as much time there as they need to.
Oh, wow.
I wouldn't say that's, the everyday rule. That's more special circumstances.
Right.
But also one thing that's unique about the archives is that it still has a caretaker living in it. So it started as Joan Nessel's apartment and sort of a small room. And in the late 80s, early 90s, when they bought and renovated a brownstone, the third floor of the brownstone is an apartment. And so there's still a caretaker that lives there. So that allows them to make sure that people can have special access. And beyond that, I also like to tell people, anyone can go there. It's not like you have to be a lesbian. Like anyone can go there. It's open to the public completely.
Cool. I was picturing you as I was watching the film behind the camera, sort of going into these tight spaces and doing the filming. What were some of the challenges of wearing all of those labels as the producer, the director, the cinematographer, the editor?
I would say for me, I used to be a journalist. And so sort of my film ethos came out of this idea that you have to try to do as much as you have with very little. So it's a role that I'm comfortable with. But it is really, really nice to have extra support. And something that I was able to do for this film that I wasn't always able to do for past films is like most of the interviews, I like would set up the camera, but I would have a camera person running the camera, checking the sound so that I could just focus on the interview. Cause I think that's one of the hardest things. And I'd say with editing's always hard. A lot of people say like, oh, I can't shoot and edit. But for me, I edited as I went along. Like I would shoot a day and then I would go home, maybe the next day and pull selects. So I kind of, by the time I sat down to do like an assembly, I had all these different scenes and selects pulled out that I knew would, somehow come together.
And The Archivettes was your debut feature length film. So, were there any documentaries or other forms of storytelling that you looked to for inspiration?
There was so much that I looked to for inspiration. The Archivettes also started as my thesis project. So I did an MFA, and it's called Integrated Media Arts, but I had to do like a very academic exploration as a result of that. And part of that was just having all these amazing references. So I looked at a lot of the early documentaries about LGBTQ people. And I did notice one thing that was interesting. Films like Portrait of Jason, a lot of them focus more on the gay male experience. And then Rob Epstein was part of this film group called, I think it was called the Mariposa Film Collective or something like that. And they made some of the early documentaries about LGBT people that were like a little bit broader. And so I looked at a lot of that early stuff because for me, the archives came out of that 1970s period. And I wanted to kind of stay true to the thoughts around what that time was like. But then I also looked at more current documentaries. And I think, one thing that we always do too as documentary filmmakers is we want to see what's out there and if the same film has been made. And I think I was like really surprised to find that there weren't a lot of documentaries about lesbian history. In fact, that there were very few. And so it created an opportunity to try to make something that, looked at this larger period of time.
And I'm wondering how the community that the Lesbian History Archives nurtured is looking towards the future.
It's such an interesting time right now. I mean, right now with things being closed for COVID, and I feel like it's giving us all this time for self-reflection and consideration and looking at so many different possibilities. I think the main thing for the archive is just that official generational handoff. So Deb Adel, who was one of the co-founders, is still somewhat involved, but every year she's like pulled back more and more and more. I think the main question for them is that she's continued to manage the finances, and she's known as like this amazing, really smart financial sort of wizard that can make things happen. And that's their biggest concern, is figuring out like, how do we continue the finances in this way? But I think at the same time, once she decides that it's no longer something that she can take on, whether that's because of aging or, retirement or whatever else, whatever other conclusion she comes to, I do think the younger generation will step up and will solve for that problem. I don't know exactly what that'll look like. I mean, they've talked about, they need more space immediately. So I think that's like one of the bigger things on there. Do they stay in this building? Do they buy a building that's further outside of the city? It's like always this competition between accessibility and archivability.
And the archives look to be full of just amazing things, stories and books and artifacts. So, how much time did you spend just hanging out and researching and not filming?
I spent so much time. I still spend time hanging out at the archives. It's like a constant. I think one of the things that's really cool is that they want you to get lost in stuff. If you volunteered there for a day, which I've had, like, I'm in a gay softball league in New York, and I've had people come volunteer, and people are encouraged, if you find something, like, just get sucked into it. It's totally cool. Like, you don't have to get through the stack of papers that needs to be filed. You're encouraged to embrace the material. And I think for me, especially because I used to live so close by, it was very easy to just come in and look through special collections, which is something that's actually, I'm working on my special collection right now and thinking about, I'm going to donate some materials about myself, kind of coming in that vein, that legacy of how I want to be remembered. But before I started filming, I was like, I want to go through all the ARCHIVETTES special collections and see what they've donated. And it was so interesting. You find everything from like love letters and cards to someone had donated all their taxes. Which I was like, whoa, this is intense. But then I was thinking, you know what? In 20 years, this might be really interesting to see, like, what they spent money on and how things broke down. So I still can get lost, and there are still things that I would love to spend more time researching there.
Is it presumptuous to assume that your film itself will someday be in the archive as well?
It will be, yes. I definitely want it to be.
All right.
And in fact, I'd love for people to have access to the interviews. And I was able to make this film because they documented themselves, right? And they put it in the archive and thought, well, maybe one day someone will come find this.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I found that stuff maybe like 10 or 15 years sooner than they anticipated. Because I think they were like, we'll be gone. We'll be, we'll no longer be around for this. And that was interesting, but I want to continue that legacy. And I just think, as someone who made a film like this, also as the daughter of a librarian, I believe in archiving. So I definitely want this material accessible, and I want the interviews accessible and some of the other things, just so that it can stand as a record for someone else to come along and use one day.
Oh, cool.
Absolutely.
So what's filling your time these days as we're all sort of hunkering down at home?
So a few things. One is that I'm a full-time professor at Purchase College, which is just outside of New York City, and I'm teaching classes online and have actually been really blown away by some of what my students have been able to accomplish. And then I edited a short film very early in this about Naomi Raplansky, who actually makes an appearance in the ARCHIVETTES. She's 102 years old now. And she is a poet. So she's this lesbian poet, and she's had a really incredible story. And so last year I was able to film her in a studio and put together this short. So that's been exciting. Excellent. And then the other things that I'll mention, one is that at 7 p.m. every night in New York City, we have this moment of applause and celebration for healthcare and essential workers. And so I decided late last week to go out and film that. And I put together a short video of that, which was really nice. Yeah, just to feel connected to something. And then beyond all the film stuff, I love baking. So I've been in on the sourdough craze. And,
so you're the one who's got the yeast and flour. Okay.
I do. I know. It's hard to get. Although I was joking with my mom, one thing that's nice about being in New York City is nothing is out. She was telling me she can't find toilet paper anywhere. And I was joking that I would just like pack her up some and mail it to her.
I think she'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
What are you most looking forward to when things open up again?
Oh, man. I don't think I've allowed myself to think about that too much. I'm most looking forward to my LGBTQ softball league. I don't know that we probably won't have a season this year, but maybe we'll be able to get together. I'm most looking forward to filming again. Like even just filming that short piece about people celebrating made me really eager to like get out and work on a project and feel connected to the world. And then traveling. So this COVID, it derailed so many things for people. And I'm so lucky and grateful that I'm healthy and I'm safe. And, I don't, all of this complaint is to be, put in that. I know that I'm very lucky and safe, but I was touring with the ARCHIVETTES and showing it at a lot of film festivals, and that got interrupted. So I think I would love to, get back on the road and be able to go out there and share the film with more people and just continue to have those direct connections with the audience.
I would vote for that too. But I'm so glad you have a chance to share it in this setting for CIFF Streams 44 and to talk with us about it on CIFF Speaks. Megan, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you both. You had great questions. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. And I can't wait to watch some of the other great films in the festival.
Outstanding. And we've been talking with Megan Rossman, who is all of the things the director, the cinematographer, producer, editor for the film The Archivettes. And we are thinking that this is a perfect time to watch that film. It's National Library Week through April 25th, and that film captures the magic space where community is formed. Once again, I'm Dee Perry, and Aaron Spears is my co-host. Thank you for all you do, Aaron.
Oh, no problem.
And thank you for listening to CIFF Speaks.